Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little. I'm here today with the 126th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. I want to thank you all for being here. Today we have a hand from a European Poker Tour main event I recently played. It's always fun to play main events. One thing I definitely suggest that you all do, if you are going to be playing a main event or any tournament where you just may find yourself short-stacked, is download the brand new floattheturn.com push fold app. This app will ensure you never make a bad all-in again at a poker tournament when everyone folds to you and you have a short stack. You can download it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/app. That's just app. Or you can search for it and download it on your mobile device and on the iTunes App Store or the Google App Store, whatever it's called. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to this hand. Like I said, this is from a 5,000 euro buy-in EPT main event. So we are playing 100-200 with a 30,000 chip effective stack. A tight aggressive kid raises to 600 from second position. If you're not watching these podcasts, by the way, you can actually watch the video over at jonathanlittlepoker.com/WPH. Shout out to everyone on Stitcher, on iTunes, on YouTube, wherever you're watching this or listening to this. And only I call with King, Queen of Hearts. So obviously we have a great hand from the big blind. We are going to be very, very happy to see a flop with this pretty much every time. We get a fantastic flop of 7-5-2 with two hearts. Again, we have King, Queen of Hearts. I check. I'm going to be checking a lot of my range in this scenario. I actually don't mind leading in this spot from time to time because this low uncoordinated board should be pretty good for my range and not so good for the early position tight aggressive kid's range. I actually discussed leading a bit in my most recent book. It's called Bluffs. And what it amounts to is I'm not a big fan of leading just because it's a really exploitable play, right? You're leading with specific hands because you think your opponent's going to play poorly against that. And I'm not going to assume a tight aggressive kid is going to be making any drastic errors versus a lead. So anyway, I'm just going to check my whole range in this spot. So I check. Tight aggressive kid bets 1,000. And now, given I'm out of position, I think check raising is probably the best play. Notice if I check call, our opponent is going to very easily be able to check behind with something like ace high and then perhaps call on the river. So we're not going to be able to steal the pot too easily if I do call and then check the turn and then bet the river. So for that reason, I think I want to go ahead and check raise this. And I would be check raising pretty much all of my flush draws in this spot and 8-6 and 6-4 if I have those hands. But I may not have those given my opponent did raise to 3 big blinds pre-flop. So we're going to check raise. I think I want to make it reasonably large. He made it 1,000. I do like to make it 2,800, which is not gigantic or anything, but certainly sizable. When my opponent calls my flop check raise, I think he has a lot of draws and overpairs. Also, we could have sets, but I think some people just go ahead and re-raise the sets immediately. But if I was in my opponent's shoes, I would definitely call the set as well. So I think we're against a pretty strong range at this point. And given our opponent did raise some early position, I think it's going to be primarily overpairs. The turn is the Queen of Clubs. So now the board is 7-5-2 Queen, 2 hearts, 2 clubs. So the backdoor flush draw is available now. Given the range I just assigned my opponent of mostly overpairs and draws, again, overpairs to a 7, not like pocket aces, right? Of course, he could have aces. I think this is a pretty clear value bet. So we went from semi-bluffing the flop, and even though we did not get the flush, we essentially got there with the top pair. So if I do value bet this, I will get called by aces and kings. Kings is somewhat unlikely given I have a king in my hand. Queens is also very unlikely. So really, I'm only going to be getting called by aces, and then also jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, maybe 6s. And then for all I know, maybe he decides to hero call down with something like ace-king because he thinks I have a lot of draws check raising the flop, which may not be so inaccurate. So I'm going to bet this. The pot's 6,900. I think a bet of about 5,000 is pretty nice. I bet 4,400 this time. My opponent does call. And the river is the 10 of spades. So now I lose to pocket tens. But again, so at this point, you always want to ask yourself, all right, what am I losing to and what am I beating that will call a river value bet? And if I check, will any hands bet that would not call if I bet? So I lose to aces, kings, queens, tens, and that's about it. So I beat jacks, eights, sixes, any seven, like 8-7 suited, and also draws that got there to a pair of tens, like 10-9 of hearts. So for that reason, I think there's certainly merit in value betting. Notice if I check this river, a lot of players will check behind with a hand like pocket jacks or 10-9 of hearts or pocket eights. So in this scenario, I think there is merit in making a somewhat thin value bet. It may seem somewhat thin, but I actually think it's just fairly standard, especially given my opponent may decide to hero call given a lot of the draws completely missed. Notice 8-6 missed, 6-4 missed, and the flush draw did not come in. So I'd be pretty surprised if my opponent does not look me up with perhaps a hand as weak as a 2. So I'm going to value bet. Pot's 15,700, and I bet 6,000 or so. I actually don't like this bet size looking back at this now because given all of the draws missed, I think a very big bet makes sense. This is a spot where if you're considering a river over bet, you always want to ask yourself, are there a lot of bluffs I would like to have in my range in this scenario? And there are a lot of bluffs. So for that reason, you typically want to be betting large. Whenever there are very few bluffs in your range on the river, you usually want to be betting smaller because you're going to be value betting more often than you are bluffing. But here, there are a very large number of bluffs that we could have. And when that's the case, you want to make a big bet because you want to make it to where you can profitably bluff with a lot of these hands. So anyway, river overbetting is something that we will discuss over at pokercoaching.com. If you have not already checked that out, we'll discuss that over there at some point in depth. But anyway, in this spot, I do bet 6,000. My opponent calls, and I win. And I actually remember this hand. My opponent looked so angry and frustrated and just like threw his cards right in the muck. It was very fun. Whenever you're playing poker, don't let your opponents know that you have them frustrated. That is not what you want to do. But anyway, we won the pot. And this is a pretty clean example of a spot where I'm check raising with the semi-bluff. We get there with a reasonable made hand on the turn, and then we just go for maximum value. I think a lot of amateur players in this spot, if they do like to check raise the flop, they go into sort of a pot control mode on the turn or the river, electing to check. And if we checked on the turn or the river, I think we would have certainly missed out on that extra 6,000 river bet. So it's very important that you do get those bets in whenever you are semi-bluffing. So that's going to be it for this episode of Weekly Poker Hand. I want to thank you for being here. Again, check out the new Float the Turn Push Fold app. You can download it at jonathanlowepoker.com/app, or you can get it in the iTunes App Store, the Google App Store. Let me know what you think. We are working hard to improve it. We want to make it a good, free resource for you. So check it out and let me know what you think. I'll be back next week with another episode of Weekly Poker Hand. Thanks for being here.